Because at that point, the fatal wounds for Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams are coming from inside the vehicle, from the rear driver's side passenger going out towards the passenger side.
In the early morning hours of October 26, 2018, two young rappers, Anthony YNW Sack Chaser Williams and Christopher YNW Juvie Thomas Jr., were found dead in a Jeep.
Publish.
Their bodies slumped in the seats as their childhood friend rushed them to a Florida hospital. And what happened next will absolutely blow your mind. The driver, Cortland YNW Bortlen Henry, spun a frantic tale of a drive-by shooting and random violence on a dark highway. But within hours, investigators would uncover something really scary. This was no random attack. The bullets came from inside the vehicle. And the person prosecutors believe pulled the trigger? Their own best friend, rising rap star Jamel YNW Melly Demons, was sitting right behind them in the back seat. This is the story of three young men who grew up together, chased dreams of rap stardom together, and recorded music together at a late-night studio session, only for two of them to never make it home alive.
In the morning, I got murder on my mind.
What makes this case even more disturbing is the calculated nature of the alleged crime. Prosecutors claim Melly and Bortlen didn't just kill their friends, they staged an elaborate cover-up, firing shots into their own vehicle from the outside to make it look like they'd been ambushed by rival gang members. The YNW Collective, which stood for Young New Wave, or more provocatively, Young Nigga World, was formed in the mid-2010s in Gifford, a working-class neighborhood outside Vero Beach, Florida. These weren't just collaborators, they were brothers who'd known each other since childhood. Melly, Bortlen, Sack Chaser, and Juvie grew up together, sharing the struggles of poverty, dreaming of escaping through music, posting freestyles on SoundCloud, and building a loyal fan base. By 2018, that dream was becoming reality. Melly's confessional track, Murder on My Mind, was blowing up, earning him millions of streams and a deal with 300 Entertainment. The song, which graphically depicted remorse after accidentally shooting someone, would later take on an eerie significance. On that fateful October night, the four friends were at a recording studio in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, working on new music.
They left at 3:19, and they got into two vehicles.
According to investigators,
In the gray Jeep, you have the driver, Cortland Henry, rear driver's side passenger, Jamel Demons, Anthony Williams in the front seat, and Cortland Henry, again, the driver, Christopher Thomas in the rear.
they were supposed to be heading home to their gated community in Miramar. Instead, the journey would end in tragedy. Just after 4:30 a.m., Bortlen arrived at Memorial Regional Hospital in Hollywood, Florida, frantically telling officers about a drive-by shooting.
Cortland Henry runs in, starts telling a story about a drive-by.
The vehicle had two bodies inside, both riddled with bullets. Sack Chaser was in the front passenger seat, Juvie in the rear. Both were dead. The Jeep was covered in blood, with 16 easily identifiable bullet holes. Bortlen's story seemed plausible at first.
He and his buddies, just the two that are in the car, were at a music studio here in downtown Fort Lauderdale at 805 Northeast 4th Avenue. He's going to tell law enforcement, and you're going to hear this statement, you're going to hear the actual audio of him telling law enforcement. We were at the recording studio. We drove home, as they lived out in West Miramar. You're going to hear Cortland say that they come across in the path of travel, that they're getting off the highway on I-75 southbound to go west on Miramar Parkway. And you're going to hear that on Miramar Parkway, sometime between 160th, which is also commonly referred to as Dykes Road, and 172nd, Cortland Henry says they were shot at.
But when Miramar police rushed to the scene, they found nothing.
Shut down the entire length of Miramar Parkway from 160th to 172nd. And they sit and they walk side by side for an hour, that mile-long stretch, looking for evidence of this drive-by. You're going to hear that there is none of that found whatsoever.
The supposed scene of a violent shootout was completely clean. Even when they expanded their search another mile, the results were the same: zero evidence. This was the first major red flag that something was terribly wrong with Bortlen's story. But it gets worse. When detectives reviewed surveillance footage from the recording studio, they discovered something Bortlen had conveniently left out of his account.
In the video, that is the first time detectives learned that there was actually 4 people in that gray Jeep.
The fourth person? YNW Melly, sitting in the rear driver's side seat right behind the victims. Bortlen had told officers that Melly wasn't even in the car when the shooting happened. This was line number 2. The forensic evidence would prove even more damning. Medical examiners Dr. Rebecca McDougall and Dr. Adrian Sauter conducted autopsies on both victims and made some terrifying discoveries. Sack Chaser had been shot in the back of the head, with the bullet entering on the left side and exiting at the top, a trajectory completely inconsistent with a drive-by from the passenger side of the vehicle. Juvie's fatal wound came from the left cheek, with stippling indicating the gun was fired from close range, within 2 to 3 feet. The stippling of unburned gunpowder ejected from the barrel of a gun was a crucial detail. It meant these weren't random shots from a passing vehicle. Someone was right there when they pulled the trigger. Even more disturbing, the medical examiners determined that both victims were already dead when the exterior shots were fired into the vehicle.
The medical examiner will be able to testify and tell you that the fatal shots to Anthony Williams, to his head, that enters in the back of his head and exits at the top, blowing out the front passenger window, was fatal. And that the additional wounds that are consistent with the trajectories going through the vehicle, he's already dead.
This meant that after killing their friends inside the vehicle, the perpetrators staged the crime scene by firing shots from the outside to create the illusion of a drive-by attack. Ballistics expert Sergeant Christopher Williams used 3D modeling and laser trajectory analysis to reconstruct the shooting. His conclusion was unequivocal.
Because at that point, the fatal wounds for Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams are coming from inside the vehicle, from the rear driver's side passenger going out towards the passenger side.
The angles, the trajectories, the stippling patterns, everything pointed to an internal shooting, not an external attack. The crime scene investigation revealed even more incriminating evidence. Inside the Jeep, investigators found one spent .40 caliber shell casing in a white plastic bag on the rear driver's side floorboard. Think about that. Someone took the time to collect one of the casings and put it in a bag. Why would a random drive-by shooter do that? But it gets even better. When investigators finally obtained reliable cell phone tracking data, which took nearly a month to obtain, they discovered that all 3 phones, Melly's, Sack Chaser's, and Juvie's, pinged at a remote location near the US 27 and Pembroke Road at 4:02 a.m. This spot was desolate, where it is dark, where there are no witnesses. When detectives searched this location on November 21, 2018, nearly a month after the murders, they found 8 more .40 caliber shell casings. After allegedly killing their friends inside the vehicle, Melly and Bortlen drove to this isolated location and fired shots into the exterior of the Jeep to make it look like a drive-by attack.
And at 4:02 a.m., Jamel Demons exits that vehicle and stages that drive-by.
The casings found at this scene matched those found inside the vehicle. They were all .40 caliber rounds. But perhaps the most compelling evidence wasn't physical, it was digital.
Lo and behold, look at the health activity data, a pedometer, a step counter, that's what it is. 70 steps. Then you're going to see at 4:02 a.m. another 70 steps. Then at 4:42, the time frame in which he's sending that drop pin to 4:53 a.m., you're going to see 1,397 steps.
The data showed 70 steps at the recording studio, another 70 steps at 4:02 a.m. when the phones pinged near the Everglades, and then 1,376 steps between 4:42 and 4:53 a.m. This massive spike in steps suggested extensive movement, exactly what you'd expect if someone was staging a crime scene and then walking around afterwards. And at 4:09 a.m., just minutes after the cell phones pinged at that remote location near the Everglades, Melly made a FaceTime call to his girlfriend at the time, Mariah Hamilton. The call was witnessed by Mariah's mother, Felicia Holmes, who would later become a key prosecution witness, though not without significant drama.
Felicia Holmes and Mariah Hamilton see Jamel Demons outside, and he is saying he's just been involved in a drive-by, and he thinks Anthony Williams and Chris Thomas are dead.
What made her testimony particularly striking was Melly's demeanor during this call. Holmes described him appearing calm, no panic, no distress, nothing that would suggest someone who just witnessed their friends being murdered. When asked specifically about his appearance, Holmes said, "This wasn't the behavior of someone in shock or fear, it was the behavior of someone who knew exactly what had happened because they'd planned it." But her testimony came with its own explosive subplot. She appeared in court visibly uncomfortable, repeatedly stating that she felt threatened by the prosecution. The courtroom tension was palpable as she testified that,
"Yes, I do remember that they kind of bullied me and threatened my daughter to take her to jail for accessory after the fact. I do remember that."
The Instagram messages, however, were impossible to dispute. Multiple people reached out to Melly after news of the shooting spread. According to prosecutors, Melly responded with, "I did that," the shishing emoji making it clear he wanted this kept quiet.
And Mr. Demons responds very succinctly, "I did that." Shh.
Detective Mark Moretti testified extensively about these Instagram messages during the trial, reading them loud to the jury over multiple days. But what could possibly drive someone to murder their childhood friends? The motive remains one of the murkiest aspects of this case. During the 2023 trial, prosecutor Christine Bradley suggested 4 potential factors: anger, greed, resentment, and gang advancement. The greed angle is particularly interesting. YNW Juvie's father, Christopher Thomas Sr., has publicly stated that he believes the murders were about money. According to Thomas Sr., the YNW collective was negotiating a deal to sell their brand rights for merchandise and licensing, potentially worth $500,000 total. The plan split: $200,000 for Sack Chaser, $100,000 for Juvie, and the rest for Melly. Thomas Sr. believes Melly wanted to keep all the money for himself rather than sharing it with the group. However, Melly's defense team has moved to block this testimony as hearsay and conjecture, arguing there are no contracts, texts, or documentation proving any such deal existed. By 2018, Melly was clearly the breakout star of YNW. His Murder on My Mind was going viral, he'd signed with 300 Entertainment, and he'd collaborated with major artists. Prosecutors suggested he resented having to financially support his friends who weren't contributing as much to the group's success, viewing them as bed weight he had to carry. The gang advancement angle was perhaps the most controversial aspect of the prosecution's theory.
Jamel Demons is a member of the G Shine Blood set.
Instagram posts showing gang signs, messages replacing the letter C with B, which is a common blood practice, and testimony from a gang expert. The truth is that we may never know the exact motive. In Florida law, prosecutors don't actually need to prove motive to convict someone of first-degree murder. They only need to prove intent and causation. But the lack of a clear, evidence-backed motive has become a cornerstone of Melly's defense strategy. When Melly's first trial finally began on June 12, 2023, nearly 4.5 years after the murders, it captivated the nation. The trial lasted 19 days, with prosecutors presenting over 300 photos and videos, extensive forensic evidence, and testimony from numerous witnesses. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence showing internal shooting trajectories, the 8 shell casings found inside the vehicle, cell phone data placing everyone at the remote staging location, the "I did that" shishing emoji Instagram message, medical examiner testimony about the post-mortem exterior wounds, and the complete absence of any evidence of an external drive-by shooter. The defense countered by questioning the chain of custody on evidence, highlighting the lack of gunshot residue on Melly himself, pointing out that the murder weapon was never recovered, suggesting DNA evidence was inconclusive, and arguing that without a clear motive, the case was circumstantial. After weeks of testimony, the jury began deliberations on July 19, 2023. They deliberated for over 16 hours across 3 days, but couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. According to juror leaks, the jury was split 9-3 in favor of acquittal or lesser charges like manslaughter, meaning 9 jurors didn't believe Melly was guilty of first-degree murder.
You're still unable to reach a unanimous decision. So at this time, what I'm going to do is just declare a mistrial.
The courtroom erupted. Melly's mother was seen crying, but these appeared to be tears of relief rather than despair. The mistrial highlighted a crucial weakness in the prosecution's case. While they had mountains of circumstantial evidence, they lacked what many jurors wanted: a smoking gun directly tying Melly to the trigger. No murder weapon, no gunshot residue on Melly himself, no eyewitnesses to the actual shooting, and most importantly, no clear documented motive that made sense. The retrial was initially scheduled for October 2023, then pushed to early 2024, then to September 2025, and finally to January 2027. The delays meant that by the time of the retrial, Melly would have spent nearly 8 years in jail without a conviction, raising serious speedy trial concerns.
It's a mess, man. Talented artist.
He was talented. When I went back and started listening to Melly, I said, I can't believe this guy was cold like this. Like, that's what happens though, man, when you got people, no good people around you, man.
Then came the bombshell that would change everything. On September 9, 2025, literally the day before his own trial was set to begin, Cortland YNW Bortlen accepted a stunning plea deal. After facing 5 potential life sentences, Bortlen pled no contest to 2 counts of accessory after the fact to murder and 1 count of witness tampering. In exchange, prosecutors dropped the 2 first-degree murder charges. The sentence was reduced to 10 years in prison running concurrently, followed by 6 years of probation. But here's the kicker. Bortlen had already served approximately 4.5 years in custody, meaning with Florida's 85% rule for time served, he could potentially be released around January 2032, which is less than 7 years from now. For someone who'd been facing life in prison, this was an incredible deal.
Mr. Henry, I'm not quite sure how your lawyers managed to do this, but I wish you good luck, sir.
The courtroom gallery, which included Melly's mother and brother, watched in stunned silence as the deal was finalized. But what did Bortlen have to give up for this sweetheart deal? The plea agreement included a requirement that Bortlen provide a proffer, essentially a sworn statement to prosecutors detailing his knowledge of the events. However, Bortlen's attorney, Joe Nascimento, was quick to clarify it would only be a couple of questions about Bortlen's own actions, and there was no requirement to testify against Melly. Co-counsel Fred Haddad released a statement, "Cortland Henry is not a snitch and he will not be cooperating or testifying in Melly's trial. Anyone who claims differently has not seen the plea deal." So was this a snitch deal or not?
It's certainly a jump to conclusion, but I understand why people may think that. What often happens is prior to any plea negotiation or during plea negotiations and prior to any plea being entered by a defendant, there are many conversations that are going on, whether it be between the judge, the prosecution, and the defendant, or there's a bunch of conversations with would be myself or the defense attorney, the client, and other witnesses. And I would feel comfortable in saying there's a high likelihood that Melly and Mr. Bortlen ultimately probably had a conversation before he entered into this plea to say, hey, you're pleading no contest. There's nothing that you can say that will essentially hurt me.
Although there's a possibility that Bortlen and Melly may have strategized together about this plea deal, Bortlen gets out in 7 years. His proffer provides minimal information that doesn't directly incriminate Melly. and Melly's case continues with one less co-defendant to worry about. The hip-hop community erupted with debate. Social media was flooded with hot takes. One prominent hip-hop news account posted, "This is like the Gunna plea cooperation without snitching." Others were less forgiving, with Instagram comments calling Bortlen a rat and a snitch. Victims' families had a different reaction. Sockchaser's family attorney, John M. Williams, immediately requested Bortlen's deposition within 30 days for their civil wrongful death lawsuit, hoping to extract more information than the limited criminal proffer might provide. For families who'd waited nearly 7 years for justice, seeing one of the accused walk away with essentially a reduced sentence was devastating. The plea also raised uncomfortable questions about prosecutorial strategy. Why offer such a lenient deal if the evidence was really as strong as claimed? The official explanation was that prosecutors didn't have sufficient evidence to prove Bortlen was the shooter, only that he helped cover it up. His clean criminal record also worked in his favor, but critics suggested the mistrial had spooked prosecutors, making them realize their case wasn't as airtight as they'd believed. For Melly, the plea deal created a new problem. On September 10, 2025, he filed a motion to replace his entire legal team, citing irreconcilable differences in strategy. This wasn't surprising because Bortlen's plea had fundamentally altered the dynamics of the case. Melly now needed lawyers who could navigate a trial where his former co-defendant had admitted to being an accessory to the crimes. The case also put a spotlight on Melly's defense attorney, Raven Liberty, who was under investigation herself. The Broward Sheriff's Office had opened an 18-month probe into whether Liberty had engaged in witness tampering and gang direction, particularly related to incidents during the first trial where she allegedly revealed an undercover detective's identity. No charges have been filed as of September 2025, but the investigation added another layer of chaos to an already complicated case. As the dust settled from Bortlen's plea, legal experts began analyzing what it meant for Melly's future.
I certainly think that it's probably in the prosecution's best interest to try to formulate a deal with Mr. Melly. At the end of the day, this isn't a slam dunk case for them, and we saw that in the first trial when it ended up in a mistrial and the jury ultimately couldn't come to a decision. And so, considering that and the prosecution knowing that with the proof that they presented then, the proof is not really going to change substantially between that prior trial and his next trial.
The delays have been brutal for everyone involved. Melly has been in solitary confinement for much of his incarceration, with limited phone calls and no visits from his mother.
They say his mama said she ain't seen him since, like, since they been in there, damn near. She ain't seen him. She said she talked to him on the phone a couple of times, but they took all his phone privileges.
The question now is, will Melly take a plea deal too? Or will he roll the dice with a second trial, betting that another jury might deadlock or even acquit? What do you think? Let me know in the comment section.